Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome. I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today has a professional background in electrical and electronic engineering. He has an interest in astrophysics, AI and robotics, general technology, and photography. He's currently writing standalone science fiction novels and has begun a sci-fi crime series featuring a hotel detective who hunts down crooks, thieves, and murderers, both human and alien, across the hotel's multi-planet installations. He and his family live in a pretty out-of-the-world location themselves, Melbourne, Australia. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Steven Savanna.
Hello, Julia. Thank you.
Steve, our opening question on Authors Over 50 is always, what took you so long to write your first book?
Yeah, good question. My electronics career probably took over most of my life, I think, and science fiction since I was about 14. And it was something I always wanted to do, but I think there was just a confidence thing that I just wasn't able to write something legible, something that would people like. And it wasn't until I came close to retirement a few years ago that I decided I'd have a really good go at it. I'd actually written a book about 15 years ago, and I ended up shoving it under the bed in a shoebox and just left it. And I did a course, I think probably equivalent to a college level in your country, on professional writing and editing. And that gave me the incentive that, yeah, okay, I can understand story structure now. I can understand how to put prose together. I can understand character arcs. And that gave me the confidence to actually do something. So I tried a few years to get it published, traditional publishers, but not interested. And I can understand that. They have very limited windows for taking on new authors. And unless your prose is actually superbly brilliant, they're really not interested. Why should they take you on? You're a bit of a gamble. So after a few years, I gave up trying to get published. And I just saw all this self-publishing things going ahead quite well now. It's quite well established. So I probably spent a year researching that, how to do it, how much it was going to cost. And that's probably why it took me so long to do it. But mostly I think it was confidence. I just didn't feel that I had the nous to actually write something that people would read and not snigger at, I suppose. Yeah.
Well, moving from engineering to writing novels is quite a feat. My husband is an engineer, and it would be a huge leap for him.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I've been writing technical documents all my life, which is not the same thing. And writing a story, having a good idea and trying to extract a novel out of an idea was the biggest roadblock for me. I thought, I've got all these good ideas, but when you actually sit down and put pen to paper and you think, hang on, I've got to write 80,000 words now. where am I getting the characters from? What are their motivations for this story? So, yeah,
Well,
it is a big
writing
leap.
that first book must have changed your process of writing. Did you get quicker in the process, or how did that change from one book to the next?
The first book probably took me a couple of years to write, and I considered that I probably needed to pay for an editor to edit it professionally. So I reluctantly sent that off to an editor in the US, and she took about a month and returned it to me with a lot of red ink everywhere, things crossed out and rewording. And I thought, how can my writing be so bad that I didn't pick any of this up? And when I read her edits, it just read so smoothly and so butterily smooth, and I couldn't figure out why. What had I done? So, yeah.
Well, professional editors are great. If you get a good one, they really do tighten up the story and help us sound a lot better than that first manuscript and draft. But their comments can be brutal to us as well.
Yeah, definitely. I had one editor who was more of a slash and burn editor, and she would take whole paragraphs out.
Yeah.
And I think it cut it down by 30%, the book, which to me was too much. So we parted ways amicably, but we parted ways. So I just wasn't interested in that much slash and burn. So yeah, you do learn, especially the way you read how editors have edited your work. And I think it helps to know structures, prose, how to structure a sentence, put that together. And so I became a lot more careful, and rather than it coming out like a big verbal diarrhea almost, stream of consciousness, I started to write more slowly and carefully and study the structure of each paragraph almost. And I know there's a wisdom about just keep writing and don't stop, but I can't do that. Once I know I've got typos and things wrong with sentence structures, I have to go back and fix it up. So the most I'll do is probably 3 or 4 pages, and then I'll stop and come back, re-edit that. At least get rid of the typos, some of the bad sentence structures, double full stops, exclamation marks that were not really needed. And then I'll get along and finish the whole chapter. And then I might go back and read it the next day. But yeah, experience and just keep writing and writing certainly trims down your writing style. Definitely, yeah.
Well, I did that as well. I would stop every few pages and I would edit because I'm an English major, and I just couldn't stand it. But I did the NaNoWriMo challenge, which is in the month of November, where you have to spill 50,000 words onto the pages in 1 month. And when you do that, you don't have time to stop and edit. You just have to get the words down so that you have something at the end to then go back and edit. But that's kind of that free flow, where you just let everything hit the page and then you'll worry about it later.
Yeah, understand. Yeah.
Well, they tell us that to make any money in the book industry, that you have to have series, and you've certainly taken that to another level. How did you? What inspired you to come up with this series?
I've been writing science fiction novels up to that point before I started my future crime novels, and I always admired people who could write crime novels, detective series, because there's so much plotting in that to get it right, and you have to get all your clues in place, And it has to make sense in the end. And people have to say, oh, I didn't get that. That is so good. And I just thought, no, I can't do that. I'm not a plotter type. But I liked writing science fiction stories in the future. And then I started thinking maybe if I set my detective novel in the future, I've now got a framework that I'm comfortable with, which is a future setting. And I could have him travel between planets, interact with aliens, maybe even artificial people. And I thought, oh, okay, that could be interesting. I now just have to get a plot going. So, yeah, I think I started and stopped the first book. I don't know how many times. I had to backtrack, throw away chapters, go right. I think at one point I'd written about 13 chapters and I had to go throw the last 6 chapters away because the story wasn't going in the right direction and it didn't make sense. So they're the hard issues to deal with. But in the end, I actually decided I quite like my future detective crime series, and I did have a bit of a knack for it. And probably the planning, which is what I had to do as an engineer, I had to do a lot of planning when you design something, you have to do a lot of research. That sort of came to the fore almost subconsciously. And I found it wasn't as hard as I thought it was. So I had an interesting character as a hotel detective. His name's Lucas Honey. And the framework just started to pop into my head for the whole story. It wasn't as though I had to really think hard about it. For some reason, my subconscious started just throwing things at me. This can happen. This can happen. This is going to work if you do this. And his character became alive for me. And I started to see him visually in my head. And that helped a lot, seeing him visually and the scenes and the setting he was in, and then the characters around him. And it just sort of flowed from that. And it allowed me to write the second story in the series. And I pinched some of the plotting from my space opera novel, which is coming out very shortly. I pinched some of the plotting from that to put it in. So the two novels, the detective novel and this space opera that's coming out shortly, are actually tied together. They're in the same world. Yeah.
Well, it sounds fascinating. And I love the fact that he travels to all these planets, but then that involves a lot of world building for each of these planets, doesn't it?
Yeah, that does. I had books some years ago. I had bought quite a few books on world building and science fiction writing. But I don't know. I don't know whether I'm someone who's been thrown back in time to now and I used to live in the future. I have no idea. But everything that I write in the future just seems perfectly natural to me. And the technology I put in, the air cars, the transportation, and all the rest of it, I don't elaborate it. It's just there, like mobile phones are here for us, high-speed air transport, space travel as it is at the moment with space probes. And it all that technology just forms a sort of a coloured background for the story. And I don't elaborate on how any of it works. It's just there. The characters use it, and there you go. It's just part of the story.
You obviously have a real vision for that. I think about when I was a child, there was a cartoon on television called The Jetsons. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I used to watch that. Yep.
And it was so futuristic, but it's all come to be true now. So maybe you're having the visions that one day we're going to see all of that come to play out as well.
I think so. A combination of things over the years. When I was a kid, My brother and I used to walk half an hour to go to the local cinema on a Saturday afternoon, see the Saturday matinee. There was almost always a Flash Gordon serial running. And sometimes Superman, and not Superman, there was a guy in a suit and he had a jetpack. And he put the jetpack, I can't remember the name of the series, but I'm sure all those things coloured my thinking as I grew up. And then I initially started reading horror stories when I was an early teenager, and I actually got bored with those. And it wasn't until I discovered science fiction. And my first novel was called The Way Station by Clifford Seamack. And that was it. Once I read that, I was just hooked on science fiction. I just gobbled it up. So I've still got a huge collection of paperback novels, which I occasionally buy, but most of the stuff I buy now is in ebooks. And watching TV, I was a big fan of Star Trek. Yeah, so, but it all took, 50 years to come to fruition before I could actually write something. And the first book I wrote, which I haven't published yet, I wrote by hand. I wasn't comfortable sitting at a screen. It just didn't feel natural writing. So everything was written out longhand. So twice. Twice. And then I put it in the shoebox under the bed.
There are a lot of authors who still write on legal pads, so they seem to think that it keeps their mind working more smoothly when it goes from their mind to their hand to the paper.
Yeah. Yeah. I find editing on the screen is difficult. For some reason, the brain skips over words, misspelling, punctuation errors. And what I found does work is when I finish the novel, I upload it to my iPad and sit down and read it as though it's a book. And then I can see everything, all the mistakes. So that's the way I do it now, is the last edit through.
And I read out loud, and that helps me catch a lot of sentence fragments and problems and typos, like you were saying. If I read it out loud and stumble over some of my writing, then I know it needs to be corrected.
I should do that. I know I've got a few writer friends who do that, but I don't do it. I'm not sure why. It feels embarrassing reading my stuff out, and sometimes I just don't like the sound of my voice reading it out, and I think, no, this is corny. But when I read it on the screen, it doesn't seem corny.
Yeah. So, well, and also that's why we need the professional editors, because exactly. I can look over your work and catch all of your typos, but if I look over mine that I've, gone over 100 times, then I miss them. Yeah, exactly. About 80%, I think it's a high number. 80% of us think that publicity is more difficult than writing the actual novel. Have you found anything that's worked for you to get the word out about these novels? I've tried a few advertising campaigns in Amazon, didn't work. I've had a few freebie offers on some of these sites that offer these discounted books from time to time. That sort of worked. I really need an email strategy, the email list to get the story out. That seems to be the way that authors are doing it these days, is to have a good email list, and you promote the book that way and then launch it, which I haven't been doing. And I'm a bit of an introvert, so publishing and pushing myself out there is not something that comes naturally to me. So at the moment, I would have to say my writing is probably a bit of a hobby. I've probably sold about 10,000 books over the last 3 years, which is not a lot. That is a lot. Yeah, but it's, when you're selling them for 99 cents and you're not making any money out of it, it's just pin money.
But yeah.
Well, the sci-fi readers will just gobble up your work and want, the next one in the series very quickly. So a lot of authors I've interviewed who write in that genre will have to get several books written and ready to go and then release them, more quickly together to satisfy their fans. And they go, and some of them go to some of these Comic Con, conventions and things like that, and build up a fan base and then their email list like you were talking about.
Yeah, we don't have many of those here in Australia, probably one a year, if that. Comic Cons mostly. Yeah, publishing is not my forte.
It's a difficult industry for all of us to crack. Well, Steve, why don't you tell us a little bit about the passage you've brought to share today and then read from your book so we can hear your tone and voice?
Okay. All right, the passage I've selected from my second detective story, which is The Pandora Effect, is said, there's two main characters. Zoe Sanchez is a female DCI, but she's a native for alien. In other words, she's an alien. She's working on the case of these two murders with the main character, the hotel detective, who is Lucas Honey. Now, they've arrived on her home planet and they're sitting in an open-air cafe. It's a matriarchal society run by women mostly, and this is the reason she's accompanied him to her home planet, because she said, "You are not going to survive on your own, Lucas. You need me to guide you through the whole female society thing." So they're sitting in an open-air cafe. I'll just read from the screen. And she's pregnant, but she doesn't look pregnant. And she's got food cravings for cakes. So everywhere they go, she has to order cake. And Lucas just drinks his booze and all the rest of it. So they're sitting there, they've just ordered. Okay, so we begin here. A waiter delivered their drinks and a cake that Zoe had ordered. A fancy multi-layered slice of deep green and blue sponge, if it was sponge, interspersed with what looked like chocolate layers, if it was chocolate. As the waiter put Zoe's cake in front of her, she placed her hand on his forearm. "Thank you, such good service." The male bowed slightly and left. Zoe smiled as she watched him walk away, briefly closing her eyes and biting her bottom lip. Lucas noticed. "What?" "He left me his card for after-hours services." Her eyes enlarged as Lucas imagined she was scanning his credentials. Her pupils had closed down to narrow slits, mostly a sign of sexual arousal in for aliens. "You're supposed to be working, DCI Sanchez. Get your mind out of the gutter." Having not received an answer, Lucas studied her introspection and then turned away. Two Feralian women were seated at a nearby table, smiled warmly, and dipped their heads to him. One then lifted her head as if studying him more closely. He smiled back and turned around to talk to Zoe. "Those two women just next to us, it's like, I feel like they're visually raping me." Zoe cast her glance at them. "Yeah, they probably are. Take it as a compliment. They know you're compatible physiologically, unlike most of the other species in our crazy effed up consortium. But I'm here with you. We could be a couple for all I know." "No, they know we're not." Lucas looked at her with a frown. "We've got numerous social nuances telling others of our status to each other, unlike you humans. As far as they're concerned, you are available and I'm just a friend or a colleague. They don't care that I may have a human partner. No, you're here, she here, or they somewhere else." Zoe took a bite out of her cake. "Get used to it." "Can they tell you're pregnant?" "Yeah, it's obvious." "But I could be your father, hence your partner." The two women were still watching him. Zoe didn't answer for a while and had her head bowed and was concentrating on slicing her cake. Zoe, would that make any difference to them? They know we're not together in a relationship. Lucas glanced back to the two women, feeling a combination of mild embarrassment and titillation. He smiled again and then decided it probably wasn't a good idea to encourage them. So that's it.
That was great. I love all the personality traits that you have shown just in that short scene and told so much about your characters.
Yeah, they're almost sort of a buddy cop duo, except one's not a cop, one's a private detective. And I like the interaction between them and exploring that. And she was in the first book and she's in this book. And what he doesn't know is that he's actually the father of her unborn child. So she hasn't told him yet. So that'll come out later.
And I'm fascinated by all of these traits that you've given them, like the pupils and how these other aliens knew that they weren't together and all of that. And that just comes to you. You don't have to do any kind of research or how do you make up all of these traits?
Like I said, I don't know. I think I have lived in the future for some reason, and now I'm back here in 2023, and somehow I know all this stuff. It just comes into my head, and it just feels natural when I write it. I write about aliens, especially the interaction between humans and synthetic people, which are also in my stories. And we're all aware of where AI is going at the moment and threatening writers. And look at all the strikes in the US with artists, with actors and writers, which has only just been resolved. And that AI technology, if you extend it to what's called AGI, artificial general intelligence, in other words, someone who thinks like a human being, imagine that in a cyborg or an artificially created person. And how do you react to that person? How do they react to things around them? So I like exploring those themes in my books. Yeah.
Well, it's very interesting that you are fixated on the future and I'm fixated on the past. You know, I feel like
Yeah.
I lived another life in the 1800s when I'm around historic buildings. They feel very familiar to me. So that's funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
What does your family think about your new career as a writer?
My wife's an artist, and she loves it. And we, during the day, we just got our own stuff we do. I'm in my study. She's down in her studio, and she's very supportive. And she understands when I've got to pay $2,000 or $3,000 for an editor, another $1,000 to an artist to get the cover done. So, yeah, she's very supportive. My family's supportive. I've given them a couple of my books, and I don't know whether they've actually read them, but it's okay, Dad. Keep going.
It's really great, especially when your grandchildren can read them because one of my grandchildren chose my book for a book report she had to do in school. And she said, well, I wanted them to know that my grandmother wrote this book. Not everybody's grandmother writes books.
No, right.
So I thought,
Exactly.
that's a legacy that we're leaving to our family and our friends and even those who don't know us.
Yeah,
Well,
correct.
Steve, as always, our last interview question is our writers over 50 are quite a unique set. Do you have advice for writers 50 and above?
Don't be discouraged by rejections from publishers. Just be aware that they just can't take everyone on, and their list might only open for half a dozen writers a year and maybe only one in your genre. But definitely have a look at self-publishing. At least that will keep your writing active, and don't give up. Just keep writing. The more you write, the better you get at it. So, yeah, just go for it.
That's great advice. There are something like 2 million titles published in the U.S. every year. So it's very difficult to stick your hand up and say, I need someone to read my book and all of these books that are out there. But I do believe that when we write something, that it's meant for a certain reader. And when they find it and love it and let you know what it's meant to them, then I think that's what we want to accomplish. That's our idea of personal success. So I just appreciate your being with us all the way from Australia today, and we wish you much success with your series in the future. And now we're excited to say that you're one of our authors over 50.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's D-A-I-L-Y, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.